Mediating haircuts, piercings, and braces, resolving parental disputes over kids' bodies, part of the series, Mediating with or Without Attorneys with Tye Bourdony. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcast. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hi, everyone. This is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Ołowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
And Tye Bourdony, a full-time professional mediator and primary mediation trainer in Central Florida, Orlando.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. We are here today to talk about kids' bodies and the disputes that parents sometimes have when they're making decisions about things that affect their children's bodies,
Right.
like vaccines and braces, ADHD pills, tattoos, braces, orthodontics. It's so much. Okay. These things come up all the time in our mediation practices. And so we thought it would be good to hit on some of these controversial topics and discuss some solutions in some ways and give some tips on how parents can address them outside of court. Okay. Because they're your kids and you love them. We just want to put some of this information out there. Anyway, why don't we just get started? This is going to be only a 20-minute talk, so we could talk about this all day, but it's going to be
Good.
very short.
Absolutely.
So, Tye, why don't you tell us how often do some of these topics come up in your practice over kids' bodies?
Right. I thought it was a great topic. When you brought it up, because these things, they come up. And now they come up case by case. It's different for everybody. But the first thing that I thought of, right, is the first place this kind of issue comes up is when I ask the parties about shared parental responsibility, right? With respect to those important things that are going on in your children's lives, like religion or medical issues or education, when you have to make a decision, how are you guys going to make that decision? Are you going to do it together? I always start that way. So what are your thoughts? And what's interesting is I so many times spend an inordinate amount of time on this issue, which really, in my mind, is a lot simpler. But people get hung up on these issues for so many reasons, and it's a little unclear to me why sometimes. But by the same token, there's a reason that they're not together, or that they're arguing, or that they're in front of us. They can't agree on things. And so they don't trust the other or what have you. But there will be these individual things that they will ask about. And so when you said, haircuts, piercings, and braces, I liked it because there's actually, you can look at three different places, like where haircuts are concerned. Do I have to ask permission if I'm just going to get a haircut, or should I just let you know I'm doing it? Who's going to pay for it, right? Piercings, now that kind of takes it a level up, right? It's not just a haircut. And what's interesting is, as we were talking, Natalia, you brought up like a person's first haircut. Now that one comes up a lot too. But apart from the first haircut, just regular haircuts or things that are of regular nature, typically you don't have to ask me, but you let me know that you did it. But piercings, now we're going a step up. Piercings, Mac, you mentioned tattoos, things of this nature. Then you're going to start to get parties really, really positional, right? And then you got to start talking about shared parental responsibility. And, well, how are you guys going to do that? Is that something you're going to do here now, or is you're going to do this between yourselves as co-parents as you move forward? This isn't the only time. There's going to be plenty of other issues. So am I trying to allay their fears? And generally speaking, say, don't worry about this issue as it comes up. You're going to figure this out together as co-parents. Or is there a specific, and sometimes there is a specific reason, like a piercing or that first haircut. And then when we talk about braces, now that to me speaks to, at least in Florida, uncovered medical expenses, right? Who's going to be covering the child for health insurance purposes? And then they tell me, and then we'll get to uncovered medical expenses. Now, braces, orthodontia, and any other, like typically, well, how encompassing is the language, or is it rather limiting? Depends if the parties are pro se, if there's attorneys in the room, who's going to pay for it. And so then by the same token, it all kind of melds together sometimes too, depending on what the issue is. So I just loved this topic. And I said a lot, so let me turn it back to yourself or Natalia, and we'll go to the next part or phase.
So I do believe that in mediation, the role of a mediator when we are happening to have this sort of issues, and please remember, if they turn up in mediation, it is usually because something of that kind already happened. I mean, there is already someone who shaved the boy's head bald, and that was actually furious, making the mother furious because the boy was already having a long, beautiful hair. And so, first of all, it shows how deep the disagreement between the parents is and how possessive they are over the children. Second, that shows that kids can be playing their own interest in between the parents, because sometimes these are the kids who want I want to have beautiful earrings like all my girlfriends have. Can I have that? My dad already agreed. Mom, please. And then it turned out that never agreed. But since the parents are not communicating well, you end up believing that you are not going to be the worst parent. You are, of course, going to agree. So that is the second thing that you need to look into, whether it is not an issue that is proving the point that you need to improve your communication as parents. The third thing is you need to concentrate on the core problem, necessity. Is the thing we're discussing really necessary? And then money. Because sometimes when you see the costs, let us say you are thinking about really making a beautiful tattoo or doing something else like a nose operation, but you see the costs, that might absolutely freeze your attempts to do a particular medical attempt on the body of your child.
Yes, and so before we turn it over to start thinking about different solutions that we've either put into some of our mediation cases or, out of the box solutions we've seen in other mediation situations, wanted to just bring up a few points. So, Natalia hit on a child who may want to use some of these decisions for their own purposes, like the manipulative child. Okay. So it's sometimes some children know, hey, in Texas anyway, when I turn 12, I can, tell the court that I want to go live with my other parent. And sometimes they're doing that because they know that the other parent is going to basically let them do what they want. Okay. Um, because they know that the two parents are divided on X. And what might X be? It might be, you know, a boy getting earrings, for example, or painting your hair a certain color. If you know that the parent you're living with is not going to stand for it, you might have a motivation as a teenager to want to go live with the other parent because they're going to let you get away with it. Now, this gets into the question of decision making. Okay, who should be making decisions? And Tye was discussing earlier, is it going to be a joint decision or not? So in my jurisdictions where I practice, most of the time it's going to be a joint decision, or it's going to be an independent decision where you just both can make the decision, which can produce chaos, or it's going to be an exclusive decision where only one parent gets to make the decision and the other one has to accept it. Okay. And then there's degrees within each one of them where we can say, well, after consulting the other parent or after informing the other parent, right? And so a lot of times this starts being a good segue towards solutions. A lot of times this starts being the way to address the conflict. Okay, Tye, you want to take it from there and how decision making
Yeah.
solutions can help with these kind of topics?
I would agree, because so we're starting to have this conversation, and let's say I say, so shared parental responsibility, what are your thoughts? And it is precisely right. What are the different levels of it? So one, what's going on with these parties? I think to Natalia's point, we're going to know. Sometimes it's not an issue at all. Sometimes what's nice is when the parties, maybe it's not working out between them, but where their child is concerned, they typically make really good decisions and they can work well together. Boy, I love when I have parents like that. Shouldn't they all be that way? But really, we're talking about not those kinds of parents. We're talking about the parents who, if they're going to get stuck in the minutia of, and it's not minutia, but really, really specific details about things like, you have to notify me before you do it. We have other issues, generally speaking. But that is one, right? We'll start saying, well, look, you can either jointly do it, you can jointly make decisions. Now you're going to make joint decisions about really important things, but the lesser things, you can make those decisions independently. Now, when they start going into those details, there's other things going on, right? If they're really going to start doing a deep dive on that, and then one of them is going to say, no, I want to make the decisions. And then you have to start, well, what's the compromise there? Can you try and make the decision? If you can't make the decision, then will one of you be able to make that decision, so long as you inform the other, as you were saying? And or for some reason, whether warranted or not, someone wants to have the full decision-making authority, right? And if we're going there, again, there are other issues at play. How do you get them through that? So it depends on what's going on, right? Because one of the easy, I don't think there's anything easy about this, but one of the solutions I've seen on a regular basis, because there are other things going on, to Natalia's point, something like, well, if the child is seeing a therapist, or if it's a medical issue, the parents agree that they will follow the recommendations of the doctor, the recommendations of a therapist, the recommendations of, there could be some other individual, a guardian ad litem, the parenting coordinator, based on what's going on in their individual cases. Now, sometimes they can agree to that. But sometimes it's other things going on. Sometimes it's like somebody just doesn't want to pay, right? And so then you have to start getting into, well, how would you worry about paying? Like an issue with braces, for instance. Is it medically necessary, or is it just cosmetic, right? And so I would agree that it's case by case, and it really depends on the things that are going on specifically. And so if we, in that case, between them, and so yes, we have to you're going to get a sense at this point. By the time we start talking about this, I've been sitting with them for a while probably, and I have a sense of what's going on. And so then where do we find the solution? It's typically very, individual, based case by case, but what are the solutions that will work, and how do we get there? It's by digging. It's by finding out what is it that's going on, and what is it that's going to help us move past this. Because that is probably going to be something similar in, well, how do you pay for uncovered medical expenses? How do you pay for extracurricular activities? How do you make those decisions as well? Sometimes they're kind of tied to this issue, right? I mean, it really depends. Or it could be very individual. Something like a tattoo, something like a vaccine, something like, which nowadays, right, could be an issue. And I am seeing it more now. Or where I do tend to see it a lot, I don't know why, if a child has like ADD or ADHD, one of the parents doesn't believe that their kids should be getting a medicine, and the other parent believes that they should be getting medicine. And what I've seen work a lot is, if the parties can't agree, they're going to let some other individual who they have faith in make this decision for them, like a therapist or a doctor or what have you. But it's case by case, really kind of depends. And then you have to follow your gut as a mediator and see if you can come up with something that will work for them.
Sometimes the parents are aware that the child has a certain condition.
Yes.
That can be, for example, like hearing impairment.
Right.
That can be a scar, right, that is maybe too early to do something about it. So a mediation agreement might help to reach an agreement for the future. You can set up a date where you, let us say, jointly go to consult with an appropriate doctor and hear what they are to say, what would be the preparatory steps for that, and how to follow such an advice. Because there are certain issues that you definitely need to address if you know that your child already has something.
Right.
It can't be just put on forever. There has to be a moment when you both address it. And bearing in mind that you both want the best, you will be looking for solutions that will economically, but also health-wise, primarily fit it in within the needs of the child and your financial abilities.
So some of the key themes I think kind of percolate through all these kind of mediation cases is one, the question of necessity, like you mentioned earlier. Okay, if it's necessary for the health and safety of the child, then most parents are not going to fight about it, right? Most people. Another theme is permanence. Okay, if it's going to augment or cause a change in the child's body that's going to be permanent to a degree, then that can cause a big division between parents. Okay, especially when the decision could be later made by the child themselves when they emancipate and age out. I mean, usually you're typically fighting about these things when the kid's a teenager. A lot of times, if you're talking about piercings and tattoos, right? Most 8-year-olds don't want tattoos, but sometimes a 16-year-old does. And so, but a tattoo is relatively permanent, okay? Or it takes a whole lot of money and pain to remove it. And so, should that question be even debated by parents? Or can they just say, look, you got 2 more years before you turn 18, do it yourself when you get to that age, right? So the question of permanence is one that divides people, and parents don't know whether or not a judge is going to, side with them or side against them, and not knowing, as usual in life, when you don't know what's going to happen, it can then cause you to make certain type of decisions. In my situation, most judges, they're all over the place when it comes to some of these things because it's down to the individual child in that particular case. Okay,
And how the
and
parents are acting over the history of their interactions.
exactly. So case by case, I would say if you're going to, put this in front of a judge and you don't know what might happen because it's the law or the case laws all over the place, well, then really begs the question as to why you're not trying to do it yourselves as parents. And if you can't, absolutely can't agree, then like you said, and Natalia, bring in the third parties to help you. Maybe it's a therapist or a facilitator or a tiebreaker. The last theme I would say comes up a lot in all these different kinds of cases is money, right? If it's inexpensive enough, sometimes the parents aren't gonna care that much because they'll be like, well, look, I can afford it. We can both go in 50-50 and we'll do the piercing. But if this let's say I don't know, what do you call a butt augmentation?
I think
Okay.
you call it butt augmentation.
Okay, well, if a 17-year-old girl wants that, and it's going to be tens of thousands of dollars, I have no idea how much these things cost. But if it's going to be really expensive, well, that's going to be another point of concern between the parents because the parents can be like, "Look, I'm not paying for that.
Hmm.
If you wanted that bad,
Braces are something
do it."
that you have that argument like that sometimes. It's not that
Mhm.
expensive, but
Yeah,
you can. I know people will say, "Is it necessary or is it not necessary?" And they're
yeah,
concerned with the money. Money is a huge
exactly.
part of this.
So money is a factor that weighs when people are considering what they should do. Necessity is a factor that weighs, and permanence is a factor that weighs. Just want to frame it around those, but we only have a minute left, so we're gonna go around real quick and let you guys say your closing points.
Natalia, do you want to?
Okay, sometimes it is the child also that sends you a signal what is important to them, and but in a maybe a way that it's worth, mentioning. And I heard about the case of the child that stopped eating to make the parents understand that the child itself wanted to be vaccinated at the age of 10 or 12, whereas the parents were not willing to vaccinate themselves nor the kid. So that might also be something to be taken into account. Sometimes there are wishes and desires of the child that need to be taken into account as another factor.
Yeah, and that also is a place where sometimes the parents might agree that there could be someone else who could help, that who could make the decision, right? But and then as you guys were talking, I wrote down two things, and what would be, so money is a big deal sometimes, and you know when it is. You get a sense, right? If it is and if it isn't, because if it isn't, then it's moral and or it's religious or it's something else, and then you have to go that route. But the other thing, whenever the money comes up, it's not just who's going to pay for it, but I also like to make sure that I put in place the repayment process. What's the percentage that you're sharing, and how? And so, it's like either the 30-30 rule, 30 days to send a receipt, 30 days to get it reimbursed. You can shorten that depending on other things, but that's like the post solution to the first solution. Make sure, how do they pay each other? That always it winds up being something that's important to address with specificity depending on the parties in front of you. Always with uncovered medical expenses do I put it in there, but sometimes I'll put it in with other things depending. And then, well, regardless of the issues and how much time we can spend a lot of time on something like this, but what if they still don't agree? With our best efforts, you can always let them know, I can reserve on this issue. You can let a judge decide this for you. And sometimes that's enough to help them figure out the solution. But sometimes the fight is all they have left. And they're just so diametrically opposed that I will either say, if it's that, and once in a blue moon, it's that important on this issue. Look, if they don't have attorneys, you can get legal advice and come on back, and we can do this issue. We can talk about this issue again, or the threat of them reserving and the judge it can be enough to help them get it done. But sometimes they're just arguing because that's what they do, and that makes it even more frustrating. But for the most part, we can get through to them typically, but it's case by case. It really depends on them and finding a solution that's appropriate, that will work based on everything that you're hearing from them. But it can be tough with these issues right here, because for some reason people really take them personally.
Yep. And I think it boils down to people's concerns as to whether or not the haircut should happen, or the piercing should or shouldn't happen, or the braces. The concerns more practical reasons, like the cost,
Yeah.
the necessity, or are the concerns more tied to fundamental worldviews? Okay. Sometimes these things fall under the category of not medical or physical safety, but more moral and religious. And a lot of times that, for parents who just see the world totally differently, right? When it comes to their worldview and their foundational beliefs about morality and what is good and what is evil. For some parents, it's a fundamental issue, and they don't want their child's dreadlocks being cut because it means something. Okay, I think those tend to be the more difficult ones,
Mm.
because where are you going to find a middle ground and help parents reconcile on such a decision when they perceive something as existential, or spiritually connected, even, or moral at its fiber, at its core? Those things almost beg to be mediated and resolved instead of going to a judge, because now you're going to be throwing it in front of a third person who doesn't know your kid to make the decision. But yet sometimes that's all you have left. And unfortunately, we have to, it has to go there. But I hope parents who are listening to this will consider the need to work with the other parent and ask the question, why do you not want this to happen? Okay. And have them ask you the question, why do you really want this to happen? A lot of times people can reconcile these things and work it out between themselves. Sometimes they cannot, and that's what we have judges for.
Or sometimes it's finding the other things that they might be wanting and finding the negotiable. So you're good with this, if this and this and this happens, it might be looking for the other place that they need something to be given to them where they might be willing to, case by case.
Exactly. Case by case. That's always the takeaway. All right. With that, we are closing out, and we will see you next time with Mediating with or Without Attorneys with Tye Bourdony. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.